Can you steel man the case that the Prime Minister of this country, Trudeau, wants the best for this country and actually might do good things for this country?
He seems to get along well with his wife. He has some kids. There's no sexual scandals. And he's in a position where that could easily be the case. He seems to have done some good things on the oceanic management front. He's put a fair bit of Canada's oceans into marine protected areas, and that might be his most fundamental legacy, if it's real. I've been trying to get information about the actual reality of the protection, and I haven't been able to do that. But that's a good thing. The Liberals in Canada are pretty good at maintaining power and leadership and have been the dominant governing party in Canada for a long time. And so they went to Justin and said, well, you know, it's you or a conservative. And you can imagine that's not a positive specter for someone who's on the left or even a liberal, especially, and Trudeau's quite a bit on the left. And they said, we need you to run. And then I thought, okay, well, the answer to that should have been no, because Justin has no training for this, no experience. He's a part-time drama teacher, fundamentally. He hadn't run a business. He just didn't know enough to be prime minister. But then I'm trying to put myself in his position. So it's like, okay, I don't know enough, but I'm young and we don't want the Conservatives. And they had a run, a 10-year run. So maybe it was time for a new government. Maybe I could grow into this man. Maybe I could surround myself with good people and I could learn humbly and I could become the person I'm now pretending to be, which we all have to do as we move forward, right? And so then I thought, okay, I think you made a mistake there because you ran only on your father's name and you didn't have the background, but let's give the devil his due and say that's no problem. Okay, so now what do? Well, you get elected and your first act is to make the cabinet 50% women, despite the fact that only 25% of the elected members are female. It's like, okay, you just halved your talent pool. That was a really bad move for you. His father, Pierre, devastated the West in 1982 with the national energy policy. And Trudeau is doing exactly the same thing again. And so as a Westerner as well, I have an inbuilt animus, and one that's well-deserved, because Central Canada, especially the glittery, literati elite types in the Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto triangle have exploited the West and expressed contempt for the West far too much for far too long. And that's accelerating at the moment, for example, with Trudeau's recent attack on the Canadian farmers. He's an enemy of the oil and gas industry. It's an utter and absolute bloody catastrophe. And look what's happened in Europe, at least in partial consequence. And he's no friend to the farmers. So I've tried to steel man him, you know. I try to put myself in the position of the people that I'm criticizing. I think he's a narcissist. If you're not suited for the position, if you're not the man for the position, you can be absolutely 100% sure that the power will corrupt you. How could it not? I mean, at the least, if you don't have the chops for the job, you have to devalue the job to the point where you can feel comfortable inhabiting it. So, yes, I think that it's corrupted him. If he was willing to talk to me, I'd talk because I'd like to ask him. I have lots of things I'd like to ask him about. I mean, I've had political types in Canada on my podcast and tried to ask them questions. So I'd like to know.
Is there
and maybe I've got a big part of him wrong.
Yes.
And I probably do. But my observation has been that every chance he had to retreat from his pharaonic position, let's say, he doubled down. And our parliament is not running for the next year. It's still zoom in for the next year. It's already been fatally compromised, perhaps, for the last couple of years. And this is parliament we're talking about. Someone asked me a question in the YouTube comment. He said, why can I trust your advice on the environmental front? And I thought, that's a really good question. Okay, let's see if we can figure out the principles by which the advice would be trustworthy. Okay, how do you know it's not trustworthy? Well, one potential response to that would be the claims are not in accordance with the facts. But, facts are tricky things, and it depends on where you look for them. So that's a tough one to get right because, for example, Lomborg's fundamental critics argue about his facts, not just his interpretation of them. So that can't be an unerring guide. And so I thought, well, the facts exactly doesn't work because when it's about everything, there's too many facts. So then how do you determine if someone's a trustworthy guide in the face of the apocalyptic unknown? Because that's really the question. And the answer is, they're not terrified tyrants. I think that's the answer. Now, maybe that's wrong. If someone has a better answer,
How do you know if they're a terrified tyrant?
Because they're willing to use compulsion on other people when they could use goodwill. Like the farmers in Canada objected. They said, look, we have every economic reason to use as little fertilizer as we can because it's expensive. We have satellite maps of where we put the fertilizer. We have cut our fertilizer use so substantially in the last 40 years, you can't believe it, and we grow way more food. We're already breaking ourselves in half. And if you know farmers, especially the ones who still survive, you think those people don't know what they're doing. It's like, yeah, they're pretty damn sophisticated, man. Like, way more sophisticated than our prime minister. And now you tell them, no, it's a 30% reduction, and we don't care how much food you're growing. So it's not a reduction that's dependent on amount of food produced per unit of fertilizer used, which would be, at least, you could imagine it. So, okay, so you're producing this much food, and you use this much fertilizer, so you're hyper efficient. Maybe we take the 10% of farmers who are the least efficient in that metric, and we say to them, you have to get as efficient as the average farmer. And then they say, well, look, our situation's different. We're in a more northern climate. The soil's weaker. You obviously have to bargain with that, but at least you reward them for their productivity. Well, it's like, well, Holland isn't going to have beef. Well, where are they going to get it? Well, you don't need it. It's like, oh, I see. You get to tell me what I can eat now, do you? Really? Okay. And Holland is going to import food from where that's more efficient on the fertilizer front? There's no one more efficient than Holland. And same with Canada. And isn't this going to make food prices more expensive? And doesn't that mean that hungry people die? Because that is what it means. That's a crucial distinction because they say, well, ultimately the poor will benefit. Yeah, except the dead ones.
Yes, today.
Today, right.